Look around you. The world today feels crowded, unstoppable, alive with human energy. More than 8 billion of us fill this planet. We've built sprawling megacities, skyscrapers that pierce the clouds, machines that fly through space. We've mapped our DNA, created the internet, and connected the globe. Humanity dominates Earth like no other species in history. But let me take you back, way back, 900,000 years into the past, a time when all of this almost never happened. Because at that moment in history, our ancestors weren't billions strong. They weren't millions or even hundreds of thousands. They were barely more than 1,200 souls scattered across Africa. Imagine that, fewer people than fit into a single high school gym. That fragile population carried the entire future of humanity on their shoulders. One accident, one drought, one disease outbreak could have ended us forever. And here's the most shocking part, we didn't even know about this until recently. It wasn't until 2023 that scientists finally cracked the code hidden in our DNA and uncovered the truth. Humanity once teetered on the very edge of extinction. For more than 117,000 years, humans didn't thrive, didn't expand, didn't conquer. We simply survived, clinging to life generation after generation, with no guarantee of making it through the next season. Picture what that means. Not a single bad year or a decade of famine. Imagine 4,000 generations living constantly on the edge, where every child born was a miracle and every winter could be your last. This period is called a genetic bottleneck, a time when almost the entire human family tree was reduced to a single, narrow stem. And somehow, against all odds, that stem endured. What caused this collapse? The Earth itself turned hostile. The planet's climate shifted in ways our ancestors couldn't predict. Before, ice ages came and went in steady rhythms, every 41,000 years. But then, the cycle broke. Ice ages stretched longer, colder, and crueler, lasting up to 100,000 years each. Glaciers expanded across continents, locking away massive amounts of water. Sea levels plunged by hundreds of feet, oceans cooled, and in Africa, the birthplace of humanity, the rains began to vanish. Fertile woodlands turned into dry savannas and then into wastelands of dust. Rivers ran dry, herds of animals dwindled, then disappeared. You are one of those early humans. You don't know why the world is changing. You only know the forest where your parents hunted is gone. The animals your people relied on are vanishing. Each year feels worse than the last. Your band, maybe 30 or 40 people, moves constantly chasing water, searching for food. Every morning you wake with one thought. Where will we drink today? Where will we find enough to eat to keep the children alive? Most groups didn't make it. They starved or scattered or were wiped out by disasters we can't even imagine. But a few did. And it's because they learned to do something extraordinary. Somewhere in this crucible, humans mastered fire, not just stumbling upon it after a lightning strike, but controlling it, using it, shaping it into a tool for survival. Fire cooked roots and meat, unlocking nutrients that would have otherwise been wasted. It scared away predators in the night. It lit up the darkness, giving precious hours to make tools, to talk, to teach. And maybe, most importantly, it pulled people together. Imagine a tiny band of survivors gathered around a fire, the only light in a world of shadows, sharing stories, passing down knowledge, strengthening bonds. In a time when every human life was precious, fire became the beating heart of survival. But let's not romanticize it. Survival wasn't noble or grand, it was exhausting. Every single day was a fight. Food meant grubbing for insects, digging for roots and tubers, raiding bird nests for eggs. Hunting? Rare. With large animals gone, meat came only from chance encounters, an injured zebra, an antelope too weak to keep up. Every kill was precious. Water was even harder. Groups may have learned to dig simple wells or to track animals to hidden springs. Some may have followed seasonal rains with almost supernatural instinct. Because if you got it wrong, if you chose the wrong valley or the wrong season, your entire family might perish. This was life for over 100,000 years, a life of scraping by, a life of relentless grinding scarcity. And yet, it was this crucible of suffering that began shaping the humans we would one day become. Because here's the thing, when your population is tiny, evolution changes gears. In big populations, it takes hundreds or thousands of generations for useful traits to spread. But when only 1,280 individuals remain, everything accelerates. A small advantage, like being slightly better at cooperation, slightly better at solving problems, slightly better at teaching children, could make the difference between life and death. And in such a small group, that advantage could spread to everyone in just a few generations. Our ancestors weren't just surviving. They were being forged by fire, drought, and hunger, into a species that prized intelligence, cooperation, and adaptability. And right in the middle of this bottleneck, something extraordinary happened inside our genes. 2 chromosomes fused together into one. It's the reason why humans have 46 chromosomes today, while chimpanzees and gorillas have 48. This was no ordinary mutation. Chromosome fusion is incredibly rare, maybe once in millions of years. Yet it spread through the tiny human population like wildfire. Every one of us alive today carries that same fused chromosome. And scientists believe that genes near this fusion may have shaped how our brains developed. In other words, our intelligence, our ability to tell stories, to plan, to imagine, might trace back to a genetic accident that occurred when humanity was at its weakest. And if that doesn't make you pause, nothing will. For more than 100,000 years, humanity lived inside this narrow corridor of survival. Imagine that, entire generations born, lived, and died without ever knowing abundance. Children grew up never seeing a herd of animals, never knowing forests lush with fruit. Survival meant hunger was always near, death always close. But then, something began to change, slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. Rainfall returned to parts of Africa. Grasslands began to recover, sprouting new life where once there had only been dust. Herds of animals cautiously expanded again, following the green shoots of vegetation. Rivers that had been dry for millennia began to trickle, then flow. For our ancestors, this shift must have felt like the world itself was finally breathing again. After more than 100,000 years of hardship, the planet was loosening its grip of death. And humanity, scarred, hardened, but alive, was ready. At all, population growth was sudden and explosive. From barely over 1,000 survivors, humans expanded into tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The skills honed during centuries of crisis became weapons of success. Fire wasn't just a tool anymore, it was a foundation. With it, humans began to cook systematically, unlocking more energy from their food. With it, they lit caves and shelters, making new lands habitable. With it, they scared off predators that had once stalked them mercilessly. Stone tools also advanced rapidly. Instead of crude hand axes, our ancestors shaped sharper, more specialized blades. Spears could pierce, scrapers could prepare hides, points could be hafted onto wood for hunting. Each improvement meant survival became just a little easier. But the greatest advantage was social. Years of scraping by in tiny bands had trained humans in the art of cooperation. Where other animals fought over scarce resources, humans had learned to share, to teach, to bind themselves together with trust. That instinct to work as one was the seed of everything that would follow. And from this rebirth, something astonishing happened. Humanity didn't expand in a single line, it branched. Around 800,000 years ago, those few survivors gave rise to not one, but 3 different human species. In Africa, the lineage that would become us, Homo sapiens, continued to evolve. In Europe and Western Asia, some groups adapted to harsher, colder climates. They became the Neanderthals, shorter, stronger, perfectly built for Ice Age survival. In Asia, another group spread eastward, from the mountains of Tibet to the islands of Indonesia. These were the Denisovans, mysterious cousins whose genes still linger in people across Asia and the Pacific. All 3 carried the same genetic scars of the bottleneck. The fused chromosome, the reduced diversity, the instincts for cooperation, problem-solving, and endurance. But each species carved its own path, shaped by its environment. In Europe, winters could stretch 8 months long. Forests froze, rivers iced over, and only the strongest survived. Neanderthals adapted perfectly. Their bodies grew stocky and powerful, with wide noses to warm, frigid air, thick bones and muscles that would shame modern athletes. Their brains grew large, even larger on average than ours. And their culture reflected their tough world. They became master hunters, coordinating in groups to bring down massive prey like mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses. They developed burial practices, placing their dead carefully, sometimes with flowers or tools. This was more than survival. It was meaning. Neanderthals weren't just enduring, they were creating culture. Far to the east, the Denisovans thrived in environments just as extreme. Some adapted to the highest altitudes on Earth, evolving genes that helped them breathe thin mountain air. Others took to the seas, building boats to cross into island chains thousands of miles from the mainland. Though we know little about them, their fossils are rare. Their genetic legacy remains. Modern Tibetans carry Denisovan genes that help them survive in high altitudes. Pacific Islanders carry Denisovan DNA that shapes their immune systems. Even now, echoes of their survival strategies live inside us. Meanwhile, in Africa, the ancestors of modern humans faced a different challenge. Their climate didn't stabilize quickly. It remained unpredictable, wet, then dry, fertile, then barren. Seasons could swing wildly within a lifetime. This constant instability didn't favor brute strength or rigid habits. It favored flexibility, adaptability, innovation. And so, slowly the African humans evolved into something new. They became the most adaptable species on Earth. Not the strongest, not the biggest-brained, but the ones who could change fastest when the world demanded it. By 400,000 years ago, all 3 species were thriving. Each developed its own tools, its own way of life. Neanderthals perfected their hunting spears. Denisovans may have experimented with medicine and food processing. Modern humans in Africa began showing the first hints of symbolic thinking, marks carved into bone, pigments used on tools, the earliest whispers of art. And slowly networks of trade and exchange began to form. Ideas spread, techniques shared. For the first time in history, human culture was evolving faster than biology. For hundreds of thousands of years, these 3 species lived in parallel, shaped by different lands but bound by the same ancestry. They were cousins, carrying the same fragile legacy of survival through the bottleneck. But the world was still changing. Ice ages came and went, deserts expanded and retreated. Forests grew, then shrank. And slowly the ranges of these 3 human species began to overlap. I want you to imagine the moment. You're part of a band of modern humans exploring northward, leaving Africa for the first time. You've only ever known people like yourself. And then, across a valley, you see them. Humans, but not like you. Broader, stronger, with strange features, Neanderthals. Fear, curiosity, wonder. What happens when 2 human species meet for the first time in hundreds of thousands of years? It must have been breathtaking, the first time modern humans laid eyes on their long-lost cousins. Imagine stepping into a valley in the Middle East. your hunting party exhausted from weeks of travel. And there they are. Humans, but different. Shorter, more muscular, faces built for the cold with thick brow ridges and wide noses. These were the Neanderthals. At first, what did our ancestors feel? Fear? Wonder? Rivalry? We'll never know their thoughts, but we do know what they did, because it's written in our DNA. They didn't just fight. They also embraced. They interbred. They had children together. Every person of non-African descent alive today carries about 2% Neanderthal DNA, proof that, when the species met, cooperation was sometimes more powerful than conflict. And the story doesn't stop there. Modern humans also encountered Denisovans in Asia. Again, there was both conflict and connection. Some modern human groups today, especially in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. Think about that. Our species didn't evolve in isolation. We are literally a blend, a living mosaic of all three human lineages. But of course, cooperation had limits. When resources were scarce, when territories overlapped, competition turned deadly. And this is where modern humans began to pull ahead. Around 50,000 years ago, something revolutionary happened among Homo sapiens, a burst of innovation often called the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. Tools became more sophisticated. We invented the spear thrower, which could hurl projectiles with deadly accuracy, allowing smaller groups to bring down huge prey. We crafted fishhooks and nets, opening rivers and seas as food sources. We carved bone needles, sewing fitted clothing that let us thrive in colder lands. Most importantly, we developed symbolic thinking. Humans in Africa painted on cave walls, strung beads from shells, carved figures from bone. This wasn't just decoration. It was communication, proof that we could share abstract ideas, identities, beliefs. And behind it all was something even more powerful: language. While Neanderthals and Denisovans may have communicated, the evidence suggests Homo sapiens pushed language further. Complex sentences, abstract ideas, stories that could stretch across generations. This gave us the ability to coordinate hunts, negotiate alliances, pass down vast amounts of knowledge. It was the ultimate force multiplier. Now picture the clash. A Neanderthal band, strong and skilled, masters of close-range hunting. Against them, a smaller group of modern humans armed with spear throwers, coordinating tactics with words, able to strike from a distance. Strength versus strategy. Muscle versus innovation. Over thousands of years, the balance tipped. Modern humans spread further and faster. Neanderthals, once rulers of Europe, began losing ground. Their populations shrank, pushed into harsher and smaller territories. By 28,000 years ago, the last Neanderthal groups were isolated in the caves of southern Spain, and then, silence. They were gone. The Denisovans followed a similar path. Their range was vast, from Siberia to Southeast Asia, but one by one their populations disappeared. Some interbred with us, leaving their genetic fingerprints behind. Others simply vanished into history. By 25,000 years ago, they too were gone. But here's the big question. Why us? Why did modern humans outlast our cousins, who were just as intelligent, just as resilient, and in some cases even stronger? The answer lies in what we inherited from the bottleneck. Neanderthals were highly specialized for Europe's Ice Age climate. Denisovans adapted to mountains and seas. But Homo sapiens? We were forged in Africa's instability. Our homeland had forced us to adapt again and again, to survive unpredictable swings between drought and flood, plenty and scarcity. We weren't specialists, we were generalists. And in a world where climates kept shifting, generalists had the advantage. That adaptability showed itself in every way. Diet. We ate anything: shellfish, grains, roots, large animals, small animals. Technology. We innovated constantly, never sticking to one set of tools for too long. Social networks. We formed alliances across great distances, exchanging goods, mates, and ideas. Language. We communicated with unparalleled complexity, binding large groups together in cooperation. Where Neanderthals and Denisovans were finely tuned machines for specific environments, we were all-terrain vehicles. We weren't the strongest, but we were the most flexible. And flexibility meant survival. By 15,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had spread across every continent except Antarctica. We had developed agriculture, permanent settlements, and complex societies. The tiny band of survivors, just 1,280 individuals, had multiplied into millions, speaking hundreds of languages, living in every environment from the frozen tundra to tropical rainforests. And our cousins, once our equals, were gone. Only their DNA remains, carried silently inside us as a reminder of when we were not alone. Every one of us alive today carries the imprint of that near-extinction event. Our DNA still bears the scars of the bottleneck. Scientists estimate we lost about 65% of our genetic diversity during those long, grinding millennia of survival. That's why humans are strangely uniform compared to other animals. Chimpanzees living in small, scattered groups in Africa have more genetic variety among them than all 8 billion of us combined. This lack of diversity makes us vulnerable. It's why diseases can sweep through human populations so effectively. It's why genetic disorders, which might have been diluted in larger populations, persist among us. In a way, our weaknesses are the proof of our survival. But those scars also tell a deeper story. They remind us that we are all descendants of the same fragile line. Every race, every nation, every culture. All of us trace back to the same tiny band of survivors. Think about what that means. The people of Africa, Europe, Asia, the Americas, the Pacific Islands, all are branches of the same tree, rooted in the same narrow trunk that nearly snapped. The differences we see in skin, in features, in language, are just surface adaptations, tiny shifts that occurred only in the last 60,000 years. In evolutionary time, that's barely a blink. We are not many separate kinds of humans. We are one family, one bloodline, one improbable story that almost ended before it began. Every child born today in New York or Nairobi, Beijing or Buenos Aires is carrying the same fused chromosome, the same ancient genes that passed through fire and famine. When you realize that, it becomes impossible to see humanity as divided. The bottleneck also explains why we are so uniquely human. Why are we so good at working together in groups far larger than any other primate? Because for 117,000 years, cooperation wasn't optional. It was survival. Why are we obsessed with teaching, with passing knowledge to our children instead of letting them learn by trial and error like most animals? Because in those desperate times, losing knowledge meant death for everyone. So natural selection favored those who could explain, demonstrate, and pass wisdom along. Why are we so relentlessly inventive, turning everything from stone and bone to silicon and steel into tools? Because in the bottleneck years, innovation was life. The people who could improvise a new way to catch food or build shelter survived. The ones who couldn't, didn't. We are the species of cooperation, of teaching, of tools. All because our ancestors lived through the crucible of near extinction. But this story is more than just our origin. It's also a mirror, reflecting both our fragility and our resilience. It warns us humanity is not invincible. We have come terrifyingly close to disappearing before, and we could again. Climate change, pandemics, wars, these are not abstract threats. They echo the forces that nearly ended us 900,000 years ago. But it also gives us hope, because the very traits that carried those 1,280 survivors through disaster still live in us. The adaptability, the ingenuity, the stubborn refusal to give up. They endured droughts that lasted centuries, ice ages that reshaped continents, a world that seemed determined to erase them, and they made it. Which means we carry that same potential to survive what comes next. So the next time you stand in a crowded city street, or hear the hum of airplanes in the sky, or watch a rocket climb toward the stars, remember this. All of it, all of us, descend from that tiny, fragile band who clung to life when the world tried to wipe them out. We are here because they did not give up. 8 billion voices, thousands of cultures, countless dreams, all of it born from 1,280 survivors who lived through the longest storm in human history. Their story is written in our chromosomes, in our brains, in our very instincts. Their legacy lives every time we share, every time we teach, every time we adapt to a challenge we thought we couldn't overcome. And that is the true lesson of the bottleneck. Humanity is fragile, humanity is flawed, but humanity endures. Because once, long ago, when survival seemed impossible, a handful of people chose to fight for life, and because they did, we are here.